Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Press and Pins. Thank you again for joining us on this podcast where we like high level fashion information and we break it down so everybody understands. I am your host, Karina. And like I said, thank you for coming back. I would share things about myself, but nothing's really going on right now. Kind of just been chilling, getting into the new year. If you follow Fibers, then you know that we just started hosting sewing classes in Atlanta, shameless plug, workshops, and all of that will be announcing pretty soon. And actually, I'm saying I don't have anything going on, but there's a big announcement for this month for Fibers. So make sure you follow us on Instagram, where I'm also doing a Black history designers that pretty much everybody should know. And this is the present, past, well, of course, not future, but who knows what we're going to get coming up. But essentially, go on social media, check us out. We have a lot of things that we're talking about within Black History Month, as well as a really big announcement that I'm excited to share. So, we're going to start off this episode by getting into our textile tea like we normally do. There's a lot to talk about this episode. I'm actually happy that I got back on the internet quite briefly before this because they also just announced the Met Gala theme. So there is the Met Gala exhibit that they're having, and then there's a theme for the red carpet. And today, literally, like 30 minutes ago, it was announced. So we will definitely be talking about that with our party fashion news. But for textile tea, last week or 2 weeks ago, we went over linen. This week, we are going to go over probably one of my favorite history textile moments, which everybody knows about, but a lot of people don't know the particulars about it and how it actually happened. And that is the Silk Roads. And it has to be, it is one of my favorites because what the Silk Road did, which it's roads because it wasn't just one solid path. It was a path of networks that kept changing because things that we're going to get into. But the reason that I love the Silk Roads and the history of silk in particular is because silk as a textile was a great example as to how fabric and interconnecting cultures can greatly shift ideas. The Silk Roads is when we first are able to look at that because you have to think about it in the context of not everybody is as connected as we are right now. So, silk in general was in China for 5,000 years before somebody discovered it. And we'll talk about how the Silk Roads came to exist. But so it was in this one particular part for up to 5,000 years. Some people even track it as 85,000 years, but it was a lot. So, and I mean 8,500. So essentially, silk was only in this particular region until the Silk Roads happened. And this is when we start to see trade. The silk really helped facilitate cultural shifts and idea shifts. So let's first get into how silk is made. So if you listen to I can't think of the episode number right now. I sure wrote it down in my notes, in my show notes. But a couple episodes ago last year, we talked about how silk was made and how to take care of it and all that type of stuff. So I'm going to do a brief overview, but if you want something a little bit more detailed, I would go there. So essentially, the myth or the legend with the lore of silk is there was this young wife named Shi Ling, and she was from the Yellow Dynasty. So one day, she's out sipping tea underneath a mulberry tree. And she's sipping her tea, and all of a sudden, she hears like a plop noise. And like you would do, like anybody would do, when you hear that in your tea, you're gonna look inside and start to dig. So what she saw when she looked inside of this tea and she picked it up, the cocoon had melted, and then we just see this. She saw a long strand, And legend has it the strand was able to cover her whole garden, which a silkworm can produce a lot of silk. But that's essentially how they say that the lore between how they discovered it, and also a little hint into how silk is actually made. So silk is from the silkworm, which is why a lot of times you'll see mulberry silk. Mulberry is the type of tree that a silkworm eats. So a silkworm has to eat a particular type of tree, which when we look back in history and we look back of how people essentially, what's the word I'm looking for? Farmed, for lack of better words, silkworms. Mulberry leaves back in this time were a huge, huge, huge commodity because silk was how most of the people in China got their money, and they only ate a particular leaf from the mulberry tree, a mulberry leaf. And these things are very delicate. So, how they are harvested, the weather that they're in, really changes the type of the consistency of the leaf in general. So that's how the silkworm and silk is made. So now we have to think about the when. So when was silk produced? When did when was it really known within China? So once again, we talk about it's within that 5,000 years, right? So because it's a natural fiber, natural fibers don't really leave a lot of material evidence because it's natural. So what does it do? It decomposes in the appropriate amount of time. So when they're going into these tombs, that's why it's such a big deal when you can find one in a tomb, when you can find silk in a tomb. But what they're looking for and what they found was the materials to create silk. So all of the tools that you would use, that's what was traced back to 8,500 years ago. But around 2200 to 1700 BC, that's when we go to a Neolithic site in Shanglin, and that's where a cocoon was found. So an actual cocoon was found around that time at that Neolithic site. Once again, silk is produced by the silkworm, and that silkworm has to eat mulberry leaves. Once we start to get deeper into, once the silk trade starts to happen and other countries, other people get a hold of silk, they then try to reincorporate it, or they then try to make it themselves. It doesn't quite work out how you thought it would. So it wasn't until around the Shang Dynasty that we start to see how multifaceted silk can be. So one thing that I think is really interesting, or really that I want somebody to dig a little bit deeper into it, I might dig a little bit deeper into it, is anytime we see a fabric being produced, or we see like an ancient natural fabric, you can almost indefinitely almost indefinitely associate it with some type of death. So the way that these people, when we look back at China and then we look back at Egyptians, which when it comes to linen, they're compared quite often. So it's like Egyptian is to linen as Chinese is to silk, essentially. So in the grave, you'll start to see possessions wrapped in silk. So once again, we go back to most of the first fabrics that we see, the people that interpreted some of them, they have some type of death or some type of value within that. And then the next thing is, of course, the religious purposes of it. So silk was a in the Buddhist culture, silk was a really big deal. So they would wrap their texts up in silk. There's even some tales about, because of the Silk Roads constantly were changing and they were really dangerous. So there's text of some kings bringing monks with them when they went to go trade, and because of these dangerous roads, and because throughout it, people honored Buddhism and they honored the monks that came with it. So it was almost like a little shield that you would use when you're working on like the Silk Road. So then, of course, one thing that we associate silk with is women, and really, when we associate any production of early natural fabrics, women are going to be associated with it, right? That's what the woman is doing from day in to day out. There's so much historical text and there's so much evidence that most of the fabrics, that natural fabrics that were woven, were from women. Women figured out how to weave it. Women figured out how to put the designs in it. So when you look at historical fabrics, even wool is the same exact way. It was a woman's job. So, of course, silk also means that there's a status attached to it, right? So, emperors would wear really elaborate designs of flowers, waves, and pinning that. This is what I'm going to give you an example, but this is what I mean by when you open up the roads, culture starts to change. Because when we look at silk before the Silk Roads, silk was in China was mostly flowers, mostly waves, things that people were able to see. But when the Silk Roads start to open, what you see in China in particular is you start to see those weaves start to change and then they become Greek symbols. So you slowly start to see how these exchange of ideas and these exchange of cultures start to seep in to the originators of everything, to be honest. So besides that, with that comes sumptuary laws, which we've talked about sumptuary laws before, but essentially it just regulates what people can wear. So, for example, during the Qing Dynasty in Imperial China, when you wore like your silk robes, it had to be 8 dragons. But if you were, that was if you were mid level. If you were higher level, you would add some dragons to it. So sumptuary laws is something that we see once again throughout history when it comes to natural fibers and natural fabrics. If you take sumptuary laws and let's think about when the Romans discovered silk, excuse me, once again, we go back to the religious purpose. Once Romans started to discover silk, the one issue was this is a luxury, so we don't want these people to have a luxury. It rots their brain. It does all of this other type of stuff. And then that's when sumptuary laws were put in place as well. When we start to see this fabric equals status, and the reason that it equals status, with silk in particular, it's how hard it is to make and how hard it was to get, especially when you go to Rome. They've even found silk in like Scandinavia, like in those tombs. Once you go a little bit further out, silk is of course going to be this luxury item and this luxury status because at this point, if we take a step back and we think about the Roman Empire, at that point they had never seen silk. It was all whispers that were going on until I think it was Caesar. Yes, Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar, what he did is he had silk awnings put throughout the whole town. And everybody was like, oh my gosh, the power, the might. How did he do this? But that's how valuable silk was. So then, when we go into the production of silk back in those days, there were three types of ways it was produced. So the first one was just women in farming houses. And that's where in 1118, 3.9 million bolts of silk was woven strictly off of women when in farming households. Right? So that's how they made their money. The second production is if you were technical. So this is when we go to, I don't want to say, for lack of a better word, I guess I'll say honoring the gifts that your traditions have like passed down to you, generational talents. That's a better word for it. Generational talents when silk was in the family. So if my mother made silk, I learned how to make silk. My daughter learned how to make silk. Her daughter, like coming from a silk family, and that's really really big when you look at Chinese culture, because they are more so about the status of everything and where's your family from and what does your family do. Because the only way to transcend the caste system or the caste levels in China is getting education, right? But education is expensive, so not everybody has that. But so those people that are more the technical, my grandmother's mother's mother made silk, they did that for their living, of course. And then you have the third group of people, and the third group of people were state produced. So they were in the empire, they were in these workshops that the state made, and you strictly made silk for the emperors and his legions of people. So then we move on to the actual Silk Road. So that's about the Chinese history with silk and how that happened. And then we move on to the Silk Roads and how exactly did China, who had silk for 5,000 years without anybody knowing, without it going down, how did that then turn into the Silk Roads? So the tale is there was a princess of Lolan, and she was getting married in the kingdom of Kalchin. And essentially, where she was getting married, they did not have silk. So what she did is she put some silk in her hair and she traveled to the kingdom. And when she got there, she snuck it in. She snuck it in. And when she got there, they started to produce silk, really just for her. And then, of course, as time goes on, it starts to weed itself out. But once everybody starts to get silk is when you start to see everybody start to rework silk in a way that works for them. So, for example, in Persia, they had a darker leaf, a darker mulberry leaf, and they took the silkworms, put them on there, and then that produced a dye silk. So a different silk that nobody had ever seen before. And that's what I mean by why I am fascinated and why I love the Silk Road so much is because with each new introduction, you see how the culture shifts, you see how ideas are expanded upon, and how silk really helped facilitate this. Because yes, on the Silk Roads, they were trading other things, right? Of course, they were trading other things, but silk was the one thing that was of value. Well, of course, it was all of value, but silk had the highest value. Silk is what everybody was going to these Silk Roads for. So once they have the silk, of course, they're taking it back and they're like, oh my gosh, what can we do with this? There's so many records of people buying the silk and then unweaving it, unraveling it, and then doing it again in a way that works for them. Because at this point, silk is heavily produced in China because it has the best conditions for it to be produced. So we have all these people trying to recreate and trying to grow silk, and it's just not working. Like centuries later, in Virginia, yeah, in Jamestown, Virginia, we have American coming over here, colonizers, coming over and saying, okay, the queen was like, go produce some silk in Virginia. Within between 1731 and 1755, they were only able to produce 249 pounds of silk. That is nothing. That is nothing when in ancient China, one silkworm could get you around 1,100 yards. So it's not matching up. And the queen was like, you know what? Don't even worry about it. So then another thing, the last thing that I want to address when it comes to silk is the stereotype of silk only being for women and silk being a very, well, it's a delicate fabric, of course, but just silk being particularly for women and where that came from. We're going to go back to the Roman Empire. So once again, we talk about the religious effects that luxury had once it entered the society in Roman Empire. But in particular, when silk hit those streets, you have to think about the properties of silk. Silk is one delicate. It clings to the body, right? They've never seen anything like this. Mind you, people are in cottons, they're in linens. Let's think about that and let's think about the weight and how silk is, right? So it's clinging to the body. It is, of course, delicate, it's shiny. But one thing we have to think about in particular that was so important back then is protection. Silk did not offer you any protection from anything. It's thin, it's delicate, it clings to the body so I can see straight. I know what's going on, right? Silk doesn't offer any protection, and that was the Romans' problem. Because at that point, they were like, oh, why would a man be wearing that? A man needs to be wearing this for protection. A man, like, we're talking about when clothes had a purpose. End of sentence, right? We talk about how silk entering that market during that time. I hate to call it a market, but that's the best thing I have. Entering at that time, this is a luxury for people, right? Their clothes were for protection. So seeing a man in silk, it was this overindulgence that civilians were not supposed to have, especially if you're a civilian man. You're not supposed to have that. It's all about protection. So that is the history of silk and the Silk Road, which is, like I said, one of my favorites. And then next episode, we're going to get into wool and how the Vikings tore down wool. A lot of people, when you think Vikings, you think like fur, and I think that's a very modernized take. But you don't think wool, girl. Those ships were made out of wool. The sails were made out of wool. Like the Vikings, once again, if we think Egyptians, linen, Chinese, silk, it's it may not hold the same way because they weren't. I don't want to say they weren't that smart, but the Egyptians and Chinese really reinvented some stuff. But wool is to the Vikings. It really is. So we're gonna get into that. But now it is time for party fashion notes. Okay, so for party fashion notes, as you know, what we typically talk about here is just the tea, what you need to know to make it in the fashion conversations that you may not have been able to spend in. So first off, the Met Gala. That's what we started talking about. The Met Gala, the theme is about Black dandies. And I did an episode on that, so we can go back if you need to, excuse me, if you don't know what a Black dandy is. But just to give you a short version, a Black dandy is essentially somebody that challenges stereotypical norms, societal norms through the way that they dress. Typically, it will be a Black man, and this term was coined up for Black men that were using European centric styles and how they were adding their own twist to it, how they were adding their diaspora to it, things like that. So that's what that's typically about. But a Black dandy is somebody that, in the simplest of terms, fights back and fights what society may think of them through how they dress. That's what Black dandy is. And with that being said, drum roll, the dress code is tailored to you. Tailored to you is the dress code, which is perfect, honestly, because when we think about the Black dandy man, the first thing you're gonna think about is suits. So tailored, right? You're gonna think about suits, and then also personality. So with that tailoring, how are we incorporating our personality? With that styling, how are we incorporating the struggles that we've been through? With that styling, with that tailoring, how are we talking about just what society views of us? One of my first examples may be from if we take it out of the context of, let's put it in the context of feminism, right? So one of the trends that I've seen when looking at all of the fashion weeks that have been going on is hips. So there's an emphasis on hips, whether it be padding on the hip area, whether it be a structural design on the hip area. There is a high detail emphasis on hips this season. So if you're black, if you're a feminist, you can take this trend and make it apply to you and how people view your body. You can take this trend and talk about, well, you can do something better than what Kanye West doing, honestly. You can do something a little bit better than putting Bianca on there naked, right? You could do something like this, something that actually speaks to a struggle within the feminine culture. That's what we mean if we take it back to a black Sandy man. That's what he's doing. It's very masculine. So once again, perfect for suiting. We're gonna see Tom Brown everywhere because which is a really interesting trend that's been going on, and not trend in the fact of not Tom Brown in particular, not him, not the Doja Cat parent, which we love, not Io, not any of that, right? The trend of more masculine dress. That's been the trend that people have said and has been forecasted that's going to slowly start to make its way back as we start to see this attack on the female body, right? So how do women respond to that? How do women respond to, okay, you're taking away my rights, you're telling me that my body is not mine? Like, how do women respond to that? So there's one side of a woman that's going to respond to it by dressing more masculine, by hiding their figures, by hiding their shape. So this being a trail of a trend, the Met Gala is going to shoot it up even higher. Like, it's that sector of fashion is going to take off. Which, and if we add a little bit more to it, we think about how office chic and like office wear starts to become popular when there's financial instability, right? We could track that back to the last recession that happened, also where office wear took up, right? There's certain trends that are all colliding for this one moment, and the Met Gala is definitely one of them. But it's definitely going to further push a more masculine type of dress when it comes to women. But anyway, back to the Met Gala. Great theme, makes sense. You can't mess it up. You just can't, like, you can't mess it up. Tom Brown is right there. Tom Brown is sitting right there. Now, that's gonna be Doja Cat, Doshi, all the way. Doesn't want to eat it up. So I wouldn't touch Tom Brown, but of course, Erica Baidu, like, she has a Tom Brown collab. Well, not a collab, but they're usually seen together. There's a couple other people that I'm like, yeah, they'll probably wear Tom Brown too. But suiting is what we're gonna see. A lot of zoot suits, a lot of play, probably a lot of Saint Laurent. Probably gonna see a lot of custom them. But suiting is what we have to look forward to in a more masculine side of dressing. So, the co, let's talk about some of the people so for co-chairs, which we already talked about, we have Lewis Hamilton, ASAP Rocky, don't forget that. Pharrell Williams, Coleman Domingo, and then the honorary chair is LeBron James. So just some more benefit hosts, which this list makes sense. Grace Walsbanger, which of course people are going to be in her. Um, Andre 3000, Spike Lee and his wife, Janelle Monáe. That makes Angel Reese, Shakara Richardson. I love that. I just not read that. Regina King, Dapper Dan, though she's actually on this list, and so many more. So it should be a great Met Gala. I don't think there's any way to mess this up. Just put on a nice tailored suit, add some personality. Made that really easy. So the next time we're going to talk about is global economy, which we talked about the last episode. But we're going to talk about how the tariffs that just happened. So last episode, within the state of fashion, one thing that we talked about is that how tariffs and how political relationships with countries can start to change where your companies are vending at, start to change what you can actually have access to. So I am going to break this down in the most way. Okay. So the tariffs are because Trump wants to stop illegal fentanyl and other drugs, right? That's what all of this is behind. That's what he's saying it's behind, right? Whether we believe it or not. But essentially, the tariff tax was 25% for Canada and Mexico and 10% for China, right? So let's talk about what each country did in response. I'm going to talk about China a little bit more because there is a loophole in there that I don't think you may know about. So China, after they got it, and they was like, okay, they filed a claim with the World Trade Organization. Mexico and Canada essentially got together and said, you see what he's doing? They said, yeah, I see what he's doing. He said, okay, we're not gonna do that. They said, all right, we're not going for it either. So they then said, we're gonna put tariffs back on you. Canada, in particular, 25% on select American goods, which altogether accounts for like $106 billion. Canada also, Elon Musk was supposed to have like his company who does Wi-Fi. So it's another company besides. He has a lot, right? So was supposed to go to a rural area in Canada and set up Wi-Fi for them, right? He said no. Yeah, I was like, don't even worry about that, honey. Don't even worry about you not getting that money for that one. And then, yes, so that's pretty much it, right? And then Canada said, with the Canada 25% one, they said, okay, that goes into effect today, which is Tuesday. And then within the next 3 weeks, we're going to revisit this. Even though those tariffs were supposed to go into effect on Tuesday, I think, honestly, the country's coming back at him. And he was like, you know, we're going to pause all this. We're going to pause all of this. Because also within that day, if I remember reading correctly, the stock market was not at a good place. Because once again, when consumers feel any instability when it comes to their finances, everything stops. Everything comes to a halt. So we'll see what happens with that moving forward. But I just wanted to reference it because we talked about it last episode within the global economy. So if you do want to know more information about that, then I would go check that episode out. The China one in particular. So China has a long-standing agreement and exemptions for tariffs that are packages that are under $800. So if the package is under $800, China does not have to pay a tariff for it. That was slashed and taken away. Now, I know my girlies who listen to me aren't shopping at Shein. I know you're not. I know you're not. I know you're not. I know you're not. But to everybody that is, in case you're on Temu, right? Or you're on Amazon, that's going to have a big effect, right? Which is why they filed that fine. But one of the main things that with tariffs and with the instability of them and the economy, the thing that you need to understand is spending changes. If people are not secure in their financial situation within the world, spending changes. So that means for you, the person that is tailoring things, spending changes. The person that is designing for special occasions, things like that, spending changes. Whenever your customer has changed the way they are spending, and this is once again for the smallest of small people, it affects you. So global instability economy instability has a great effect. We'll talk about it a little bit more with our main topic today, which is, let me get the name correct. Discovering Reinvent. So the mainstay when we talk about the state of fashion is going to be how consumer shifts are starting to happen, right? But this is one of the reasons, right? Because you don't have to know too much information to know when a percent gets higher, things cost a little bit more. You don't need to dig too much further into it. Your consumer maybe doesn't care about that, right? They're going to read the headline. This is not the news that everybody may dig into, but what they are going to get from that is things may get a little bit higher. So whether or not they actually get higher, which they are, but if they did not, there's still an instability. There's still an unstableness there. So people are going to be more cautious with what they spend. Literally on a regular phone call, I was on the phone with my mom, and we were talking about something, and she was just like, "Well, I don't know about that spending, them tariffs." Like you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that and to feel that type of emotion. So besides that, Fashion Week has been back. I think it's so funny to talk about like the global standpoint or something and be like, okay, but on this Fashion Week. But Fashion Week is back. There has been menswear, couture Fashion Week, and currently this week, New York Fashion Week starts. So I'm just gonna go over some quick little shows that I really enjoyed that you may like too. I would look into them, look at the detailing. Once again, when you look at enough shows, one thing you start to understand is certain trends and connections that you see throughout them. But you do not know unless you flex that skill. So I always suggest, even whether you're designing, whether you're looking at fabrics, constantly look at shows. Just flip through them, just to get your mind on cue with what's going on in the world, and then you start to pick up trends and you start to see, okay, I like this, I don't like that, blah blah blah. So Couture Week, of course, we have Schiaparelli, we have Valentino, we have Jean Paul Gaultier, and we have Miss Sohi. Make sure you look at those; those were really great. And then for menswear, we have Saint Laurent, which is always a good show. We have Bianca Sanders, Wu Young Mi, Martine Rose, and then Zinnia. So I would look at those shows just to know what's going on. And then I had Kanye and his life at the Grammys, but girl, it's not worth talking about. But this one, for all of my readers, for all of my fashion girlies, this one actually made me upset. This one really got me. So if you read, you probably know who Otessa Mossfog is. Otessa Mossfog, which My Year of Rest and Relaxation, right? That's her book. I can't think of a other book right now, but she is partnering with Prada to create a book on 10 short stories on 10 protagonists that are in the product spring 2025 collection, and it's not going to be sold in the US. That made me mad. That made me mad. When we're looking, this is a dumb side note, when we're looking at shows and you're looking at fashion runway shows, make sure you're looking for the story aspect of it, right? Because the fact that Prada can pull out 10 protagonists within one collection and then actually have a story about them, that's the type of depth and the brand understanding that you have to have when you're creating something. Right. You should look at one of your looks, one of your a piece in your collection and be able to describe who's wearing it, where she's wearing it from. And this, I think it's such a fun exercise. It's cute. I hate to say cute, but it's fun. I didn't even realize that Otessa had this life in fashion. So she's written notes for Porenza Schuler, their fashion shows. She has walked the runway before and even talked about how she was really into like vintage pieces and she's been on Depop. Like this is like she sold her pieces on Depop. But this is my type of lore. This is my type of author lore, and I'm definitely gonna read her books. But I wish that these short stories were available in the US, but they're not. So that's actually really annoying. But I think I want to make it my mission to get my hand on this book because I love her as an author. So anytime two of my worlds start to collab, I'm like, oh my gosh, I ah. So anyway, besides that, if you're in Charleston, South Carolina, a new museum, a new exhibit just opened up at the Gibbs Museum of Art, and really it just shows the similarities between fashion and art. So it's a great exhibit to go look at. And then the last follow up is Last episode, we talked about Glenn Martins and how Y Project was sadly closing its doors. Well, it announced today that he is the creative director for Mason Margiela, which is a big, huge step. I'm excited to see what he does with those resources, but that's just a follow up on that one. All right. So now we will get into consumer shifts. Okay. So last episode, we talked about the global economy and what that meant within the state of fashion of 2025. Once again, the business of fashion brand, products, the business of fashion company essentially comes out with a state of fashion every top of the year. And they interview all of these fashion executives and like, hey, this is what's going on in the world. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm concerned about. And they all pretty much have a common denominator. So this episode, we are going to get into consumer shifts. So essentially, the main topic about this is going to be discovery reinvented. So how is the customer finding us? That's what we want to reinvent. That's what we want to change. So right now, customers are overwhelmed. Shoppers are overwhelmed. You have too much access at your fingertips, right? So choice paralysis is one of the factors and a negative factor that has been happening within the fashion industry altogether. And what that means is just there's too many choices. There's too many choices. You get overwhelmed, and the consumer, the shopper, does not know what to do. So they do nothing. They don't do anything. They don't purchase anything. There's too many brown loafers. I don't know which company is the best company. And this also, we could look a little bit at drop ship to say this because everybody's getting their thing from the same vendor. So why would I go to this company versus this company? It's overwhelming. And there is a lot going on. And that choice paralysis has really affected a lot of customers. So they ran some stats, got us some statistics, and around 74% of people are not making purchases because it's too overwhelming. Once again, 74% of people are not making purchases because it's too overwhelming. 84% of people are saying, listen, the search engine that's on the website, I hate it. So I'm not going to make a purchase there either. And it makes me think about when you're doing online shopping or Netflix. Let's use Netflix. And you can type a full movie in on Netflix, right? So let's say I'm typing in Grease, Gre, and then it pops up. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that. I click it and it's not there. It's one of those like, yeah, we knew exactly what you were talking about, but nah, you actually do not have it. So that search engine, or let's think about it when you're searching online at your favorite store, and what you search, you click it, they have it. You've tried to add it to your cart, it's sold out. So why was it even there to begin with? So 80% of people are stopping at that point. Like, you know what? I don't even like the way this search engine is working, so I'm not gonna worry about it. Essentially, companies are trying to reinvent how they are discovered. And they're using a couple different ways. So let's go ahead and get into them. Of course, the first one is going to be AI. AI is going to be a tool that I don't know when it's not going to be used ever again, right? I truly do not. Excuse me, because we've been using it for a really long time. So AI to curate personal experiences. So taking highly personal data and giving you what you want back, essentially. And that's what, anytime you hear somebody say, if the app is free, it's because they're selling your data. That's what they mean by that. So a company will buy data from, okay, my consumer, I know who my customer is, and I know she probably likes to shop at store A, right? This is probably where she gets groceries. That's probably where she does some of her shopping at. I'm going to buy that store's data. I'm going to buy that person's data. And then I'm going to take this and then I'm going to curate personal recommendations for that person. Another one would just be AI, but used personally. And this is different because in this way, what it's doing is offering you real time recommendations. So this isn't something that they are serving it up to you, like saying, hey, I took all your data from this and I realized that you may like this product. Look at that. Instead, what this AI is doing is as you're shopping, as you're doing what you need to do, they're pulling up recommendations. So they're taking other data and being like, you know what? That person bought that with this look. Let me offer that real fast. That's what that looks like. Another one would be social commerce. So TikTok Shop is not going anywhere. Pinterest ads aren't going anywhere. And that's how some brands are getting rediscovered. That's how they're reinventing that discovery process is let me put an ad on Pinterest to this market real fast and see who picks it up. So besides those, there's two systems that brands are also using, two new startups. Really, that seem really interesting. So we have Daydream. Daydream, when I was reading about it, because it's still in its pre-beta launch, so they're just getting companies to sign up for it and like testing small batches. It's like a Pinterest board, and essentially, let's say you go to ChatGPT and you say, I need a white summer layering top. It'll then pull up a Pinterest board like feed of all of the brands that have signed up for that system, and you could just purchase it right in the app. Right. And I'm sure as you use it, it starts to secure, it learns you better. That's one thing about AI. As you use it, it learns you better and blah, blah, blah. The second system that they're using is a capsule. And capsule looks like Google image search and Pinterest mixed together. Essentially, what you do is you take a screenshot, take a picture, you put it in the app, and then it gives you this is that white skirt for $10 here. This is that skirt for this amount here. And it just gives you all of the items, which I'm like, okay, I see the way you could use that, but all I could think of is from top to bottom, people are just like be recreating looks instead of like adding their own to it. But that's the two systems that are new that are starting to launch that they're testing within the background to really see how it affects the consumers and see how they begin to shift. Now, besides that, besides a company deciding, listen, we need to reinvent the way that we are being discovered. A new area that I hinted at last time that they're talking about is called the silver spender. The silver spender is your 50-year-old and up customer. That is what the silver spender is. And that is the person that in this year, maybe even 2026, we're going to start to see companies gear their content to, which is why political standings are important because the political standing then affects the political standing of the target customer affects how the company acts. Now, of course, some share morals and values and things there. But if you're a company, capitalism, and you're just trying to make a quick buck, your consumer changes, their values, you change with them. So the consumer spot or the consumer growth area that people and companies are going to start focusing on is the 50-year-old and up market. So right now, within this year, they expect that market in particular to have a 48% growth. That is huge. That is huge. So what companies are going to start to do is to place themselves as a multi-generational company. Right? So yeah, we could serve your grandmother, but we could serve you too. Right? Yeah, we serve your daughter, but isn't this so cute for you? And I think one of the most interesting ways that this cultural shift is happening is because of the way women view themselves. Which, pause, we're going to get into this, but we're going to get into that. But essentially, within the last year, 73% of Gen Z have changed the way they spend versus when we look at the 50-year-old gap, they haven't. They've actually been growing. Gen Z is 50% more likely to shop at different stores versus the 50-year-old customer that only 30% of them are willing to grow out. So not only is that customer spending more, they're more brand loyal, which we go back to being discovery reinvent. People are going to start reinventing how that person is finding them, which we'll get into. But one of the major things that I think is so powerful about this movement in particular is that one of the main reasons it's happening is because women are deciding that the age norms no longer need to be a subject of their lives. So people that are 50 and up are now saying like, hey, I've discovered my style more. Versus in the past, when we look at past generations, because the life expectancy is going up and birth rates are going down, which we haven't seen within our past generations before. And to this extreme, this cohort is just growing so much. So not only are these group of people, which men too, are these group of people saying, hey, I'm shifting my attitude towards what age looks like. I'm shifting my attitude towards the stereotypes of what a 50-year-old has to dress like. That market, that cohort starts to open up. So now you have 50-year-olds that are rediscovering their style and they want to dress and they're rediscovering their personal style. That's a boom. That's a boom in that one market that's happening versus the Gen Z person. Once again, we go back to financial instability. They don't know where they're getting their money from. They're spending a little bit different than this person is spending. So, which is when you get to political standpoint, it's disheartening because there is a disproportional amount of wealth between the 50 and up age range and everybody else. When I say everybody else, I mean millennials. I mean, I can't think of the, I think that's Gen X who was before millennials. Yeah, but it's a disproportionately. They are more wealthy. In 2024, that age group held 72% more wealth than anybody else. They held the most wealth. They're growing within their style. They're like, there's so much stuff that's going on within that cohort that companies are like, hold on. Because when you're a company, typically you don't focus on the older customer. You just don't. Because we go back to the societal views of that older person. We go back to ageism. After a certain type of age, you disappear. If you haven't watched Medlock, she tell you that. But at a certain age, you just disappear and people don't pay attention to you anymore. That is now changing. That's now changing. And this group they're holding the wealth and they're shopping. So that's what brands are going to start to go to. So now we look at how will brands change. So with that age range, experiences matter. Oh, and experience matters. That customer service, oh baby, it needs to be top tier. How are you getting them out of the house? Right? We also look at that age range, which not all of them are retired, but most of them are retired. So most of them don't want to be in the house shopping. They want to get out. So how are you getting them up and out of the house? Two, they're not trend driven, right? So we're going to start to see some language change. So for example, I may show a Gen Zer, hey, this is viral. This viral hack on TikTok, this on TikTok. An older person does not care about that. What an older person cares about is their own personal style. So you're going to have to sell them something that's timeless. Instead of, hey, look at this viral TikTok hack, it's, hey, I've had this for years and it's lasted me for this long and da 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 blah blah blah. So we are going to start to see taglines change just a little bit to not be so customer age locked in, right? So people are going to start to shift their copyright to not look like the models that they book, to not seem like they're just one age range. They want to expand that more. Another thing is functionality matters with that age group. So I need, once again, we go back to classic, we go back to timeless. I need to be able to use it in multiple ways. It has to be day and night, which that key factor goes into recession. So something like mix and match suits, all of that mix and match, like office pieces, how you can wear this to day and night. That all came when the recession was looming. So that's another factor that may plug into that. And then also, value is more important to them for price, which probably had a lot of people's ears perked up. Because if you prove the value to them, they'll pay the price. Right? Versus it being the opposite way around, with just leaving you to sell them on a lower price because they're shopping at Shein. Your 50-year-old customer, she's not shopping there. She's not shopping there because, once again, value over price. So I will pay a higher price if the value is worth it. So that is a plus side. So prices make it easier to go up. But it's also about, with this age range, which it has to be such a big company strategic shift, like on all levels, because where that customer finds you, how you get that customer, it's completely different than Gen Z. So for example, age 50 and up, they're slower to use omni-channel. So equal to use it online. As much as they would shop in store, they would do something online, right? That's equal. But they're not as equal. They're not as ready to use omni-channel. And when I was reading about it, I just had to giggle. I had to chuckle. Because that's essentially somebody coming in and saying, hey, I bought this online to pick up in store and you don't have it. They hate that. Oh my gosh. Have you ever walked into the store and heard somebody going off about that? I'm like, well, it says that you have one online. And the sales associate is like, well, that's not always accurate. And that's their problem. If it's not going to be completely accurate, they do not want it. And another thing that I thought was like a downside, but it's gearing towards the way the world is working. They do not care about resale. Resale is low on their agenda. Resale is so low on their agenda. They also don't necessarily care that much about sustainability. So that's no longer going to be a big hit factor. It is with younger kids, but 50 and up, girl, they don't care. They don't care. They are 18% less likely to buy something because it says sustainability on it. You understand that? They are 18% less likely to buy something because it has sustainability on it. Your consumer changes, the company starts to change. So now we may see companies, not some companies in particular, not care about sustainability anymore. Which is why, once again, if you don't learn anything from this podcast at all, you need to understand that fashion and the world of fashion and politics go hand in hand. And this is a prime example. This is a prime example. You're trying to get the silver spender, they're 18% less likely to buy your stuff if you put sustainability on it. Who's gonna remove it? Are you not? You're gonna remove it. So that's when things like this happen and customer shifts, you start to see what a brand is really about. You start to understand what values and what morals a company actually wants to stick by. Right? I'm not gonna say that. But they also want multi-brand stores. So the department store, the staple store in the mall, they may slowly start to get a hype, the people that are left. But so those are the two ways that consumers have started to shift. Next episode, we'll go over one last final way. But the silver spender and how people are being discovered are one of the two consumer shifts that are starting to happen. So I hope you learned something within this episode. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, have a great day, Toodles.